What I want to talk about today, though, is the situation in Ferguson, Wisconsin. And I know that Stefan Molyneux talked about it a lot yesterday, and I'm not going to necessarily go over all the things that he discussed, but I just want to put my own spin on it and talk about it because it's really been bothering me these past several days as the situation has escalated over in Ferguson, and despite all the evidence that is now coming in. You know, when I first heard about this, and I heard the idea that, well, this cop executed this innocent black man, child, teen, however they described him, that he just shot him in cold blood in front of dozens of witnesses in broad daylight, that he was standing there with his arms raised. I give up. I surrender. Don't shoot. I'm unarmed. And the policeman just fired multiple bullets into this unarmed, surrendering man simply because he was black and the policeman was a racist. You know, it sounded very far-fetched to me, and I thought, well, you know, is it possible that this could have happened? Well, I suppose anything is possible, but I thought it was highly unlikely that that was, in fact, what happened. And I wanted to wait for more of the facts to come out to come to a conclusion as to what I believe happened. But now that a lot of facts have come out, the people who jump to these premature conclusions, rush to judgment, are as oblivious to these facts as they were in the Trayvon Martin case. It seems like they're going to do the whole thing all over again. And what all of the evidence seems to suggest, all of the witness accounts of the situation, the forensics, the autopsy, what everything shows is not an innocent, nonviolent, peace-loving child just gunned down by a white racist cop. But what the evidence purports to show, and the autopsy and the witness accounts, what it shows is that not only was the shooting of this young man justified, but that the officer, the policeman who shot him, really had no other choice. That Officer Darren Wilson had no choice. That it was Michael Brown's actions, unfortunately, that gave this officer no choice but to shoot to kill. The final shot, the shot that was fatal to the head, I think that Officer Brown had no choice but to shoot to kill. Now, is it possible that more evidence will come to light that might disprove what at this point looks like the most probable explanation for what happened? Yes, it's possible, but it's very, very unlikely. And what really bothers me is the racism of the civil rights community, of the black community. They will rush to judgment. They are they are ready to lynch this policeman simply because he's white and the person he shot was black. If the policeman were black, this wouldn't be an issue. We wouldn't have heard about this. If the victim were white, we wouldn't have heard about it. The only reason this is a national news story is because the policeman is white and the person he shot was black. That's why it's a story. And it's a story because racists assume that if a white policeman shoots a black individual, that there can't be a valid reason for it. It must be out of racial hatred, right? That obvious, there could be no other explanation, even though the other explanations make much more sense than the fact that a policeman who's been a policeman for 6 years, an exemplary record, he's been recognized with an accommodation for valor or bravery in the line of duty, that this individual would somehow snap and murder somebody in cold blood, in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses, without any regard for the consequences to himself, would just do this. That makes no sense. But what do the facts actually show, right? And if you look at the autopsy, and if you look at the testimony of witnesses, not the four who have come forward, and I'm going to get to that. I'm going to go over the four people who claim that Brown had his arms in the air and that he was surrendering, because I believe all four of these people are lying, and I'll explain why when I go over what they said. But this is what most likely happened on that day. First of all, Michael Brown and his friend went into a convenience store and robbed the store of a box of cigars. They didn't shoplift. He didn't, put the cigars under his T-shirt and hope nobody noticed when he snuck out. He just grabbed the cigars and walked out the door. And when the clerk confronted him, he violently shoved him aside and then further intimidated him with his size and basically said, hey, I'm taking these cigars and there's nothing you're going to do about it, and walked out the door. So they basically violently robbed this convenience store. Right? And now, as they're walking down the street on their way home, because they're going to basically take these cigars and they're going to hollow them out and they're going to smoke pot. They're going to turn them into gigantic joints, which in a way is another similarity between the Trayvon Martin situation. I mean, not only did the families first release pictures of this individual when he was much younger than 18, but it started, where they're at the store picking up drug paraphernalia or paraphernalia to make, I think the lean, I don't know what that cocktail was that Trayvon was making, but they were both trying to get high. But at least Trayvon purchased his Skittles and his iced tea, right? Michael Brown stole his drug paraphernalia. But anyway, while he's on the way home, a policeman notices him walking in the middle of the street, disrupting traffic, and pulls alongside and, says, hey, get out of the street. You got to go on the sidewalk. And then apparently at some point, according to the policeman and another witness, there was a call about the robbery. And these individuals fit the description of that robbery. And, by the way, there are a lot of people who feel that robbery is irrelevant, that the fact that the convenience store was robbed was irrelevant and that they shouldn't have even released the footage. And, of course, the robbery is extremely relevant. It's relevant for at least two very important reasons. Number one, the initial narrative is that this man was a gentle giant. He's 6'4", almost 300 pounds. And his family members and other people were describing him as a giant, a non-violent, a peaceful person, never would hurt a fly. Maybe he looked menacing, but that he wasn't. And again, the idea was to say, well, maybe the policeman just misjudged him based on his size and assumed that this was a violent individual, even though he was very peaceful and would never hurt a fly. Anybody who watches the video of that robbery knows that that is not the case, that this is not a non-violent, peaceful man. This is a violent individual who uses his size to intimidate others. Now, I have no idea what else he's done. They make a big deal out of the fact he has no record. He just turned 18. Obviously, he hasn't been 18 long enough to have an adult record. His juvenile record is sealed. We have no idea what he did as a juvenile. But the footage of the robbery certainly shows that he wasn't peaceful, that he was a violent guy, and so that narrative is destroyed. But number two, it also shows the state of mind that he was in when confronted by the policeman. He had just robbed a store less than 10 minutes earlier, and obviously had a reason to be maybe paranoid or worried about a policeman, because after all, he had just robbed a store. They've got the stolen merchandise on them, and so they're going to be a little leery. And, you would think that given the fact that they just robbed the store, they would try to be inconspicuous, that they would be walking on the sidewalk, but they really didn't care. They were walking in the middle of the street, disrupting traffic. So the policeman notices them disrupting traffic, pulls over, and then, puts two and two together because he heard about the robbery. They fit the description. They're carrying what may appear to be a box of cigars. So the policeman rolls down his window, or he had already rolled down his window when he had asked them to, get out of the street. And he pulls his car up near the two individuals, or he backs up, back because he, double back. And when he tries to get out of his car, that's when Michael Brown, right, basically slams the door shut and prevents the officer from getting out of the car. At which case, Brown punches the officer through the open window. And we already have reports now that he suffered a fractured orbital as a result of that punch, and his face was swollen. So this individual punches through the window, and after he punches him, he reaches inside the car to grab for his gun. And while they're struggling for the gun goes off. And even the witnesses that are claiming that he was shot with his hands up, he was executed. One thing they all have in common is that there was a shot fired while they were struggling. So there was a shot fired in the car. Then after that, Brown runs away. Now the policeman, he's got a robbery suspect who now, more importantly, just assaulted a policeman and tried to kill him with his gun. So this is a violent guy. He's got to stop this guy. So he gets out of the car, chases him a little bit with his gun drawn, and he yells, "Freeze, halt," at which point Michael Brown, does stop running and turns around. And again, according to the police officer and other witnesses, Michael Brown begins to taunt the police officer, "You're not going to arrest me." And obviously now he's going to be afraid because now he's committed not just one crime, but a second crime, a more serious crime of assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, attempted murder potentially, and he doesn't want to be taken. He doesn't want to be arrested. So he decides to charge this police officer. Even though the police officer says, "Halt, don't shoot," even though he has a gun pointed at him, this gentle giant decides that he is going to charge an armed officer. The officer then begins to fire. According to the autopsy, he was shot 4 times in the arm. Now, I don't know, maybe the officer was trying to wound him. I don't know. Maybe he was missing, or maybe he was deliberately shooting at his arm. The fact that he hit him 4 times in the same arm might suggest that he was aiming for the arm. I don't know that to be the case, but maybe he was. But in any event, he's shooting him. These first wounds were not fatal. If at any time Michael Brown had stopped his charge because he was shot, he would still be alive. But he kept on coming. Now think of it from the officer's perspective. Here's a guy that punched you in the face, that went for your gun, and now you've ordered him to freeze, and he's charging at you, he's coming at you, and you've shot him several times, and he doesn't care. He's still charging at you. What are you going to do? I mean, you have a couple of seconds to make up your mind, because if he gets you, this 6'4" guy, 300 pounds, if he gets you, there's a good chance he's going to knock you out, take your gun, and kill you. And of course, once he's taken your gun and killed you, and he has your gun, and he's already murdered a cop, maybe he's going to go on a rampage and start killing more people. Who knows? Who knows what this guy is going to do? But this officer has to make a decision in a split second what to do. And I think the only decision he could have made, given the circumstances, is to shoot to kill at that point. Even if he was shooting to just, maim him initially and scare him and stop his charge, once he had just ignored the shots to the arm, and he was just a few feet away, what could he do but shoot to kill? That's all he could do. And am I saying that is that exactly what happened? I don't know. It's the most likely scenario. It's what the policeman said happened. It's what apparently more than a dozen witnesses. In fact, there is a video out there on the internet. It's about a 10-minute video. The guy who originally posted it took it down. But in that video, you can hear a conversation between somebody who witnessed the event, right, and a bystander who came after the fact. And this guy is describing what happened, and he describes exactly what I said. And that's exactly what the policeman said. And this guy had no reason to lie. He didn't even know he was on camera. In fact, the person who posted the video didn't even realize what was there. When he did, he took the video down. But fortunately, other people had made copies. And so we have a transcript and we have the video in where it is described that Michael Brown charged the policeman. And of course, the policeman had no alternative but to shoot Michael Brown, because he had no idea what Michael Brown was going to do. In fact, based on the fact that Michael Brown had already punched him, had already gone for his gun once, that the gun had already fired, he had the most likely assumption he made was that if I don't shoot this guy, he's going to take my gun and he is going to kill me. Now, what about these witnesses? The witnesses that claim that Michael Brown surrendered, that he put his arms in the air and said, "Don't shoot." I mean, that's the rallying cry of everybody, the Washington Redskins, the Brown University students. Hands up, don't shoot, I surrender, universal sign of surrender. What about the 4 witnesses who claim that that's what happened? I'm going to get into it because I think all 4 of those witnesses are lying. And I'm going to get to them one at a time, what they said and why they lied. And so I'm going to do that after this break. And I think the more credible witnesses are the more than a dozen, according to reporters, who are verifying the version as told by Officer Darren Wilson, which, of course, is the only version that makes sense. The other version is far-fetched and seems very, very unlikely to have happened. So we got a quick break, and I'm going to talk about these 4 witnesses on the other side.
Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff, and I'm continuing to talk about the Ferguson, Missouri situation and the killing of Michael Brown, not the execution of Michael Brown, but I believe the justifiable killing from Darren Wilson, who I believe, based on the evidence, based on the testimony, based on the autopsy, and based on just, what's most probable, what makes the most common sense, is that Darren Wilson had no choice but to shoot Michael Brown. I'm sure the last thing he wanted to do when he woke up that morning was kill somebody. Probably the last thing he wanted to do when he was standing there, with his gun pointed at Michael Brown, was to pull the trigger. I'm sure he hoped that Michael Brown was going to freeze and listen to him, but he kept coming. He kept coming. Even though he was shot in the arm, he still kept coming. I think Wilson maybe he assumed he was on something a lot stronger than the pot that he may have been smoking. That was interesting, though. I read this one article when they mentioned that, he smoked pot, and the autopsy showed he had PCP in his system. This reporter from the Washington Post was saying, well, it doesn't prove anything. It just shows that he was a quintessential American teenager. Quintessential? I hope not. Quintessential means, perfect, ideal example of what an American teenager was. I certainly hope that Michael Brown was not the perfect example of an American teenager, because if he was, we're in a lot of trouble. Although we are in a lot of trouble, but for other reasons. But let me get to these witnesses, because apparently all of this is based on what 4 people have claimed. Now, if there's more than 4 witnesses, let me know. I can only find 4 people who claim that they saw it and have spoke publicly about what they saw. 2 of them were guys, 2 were women. Let me go with the guys. Okay, one guy who made a YouTube video. He's in his kitchen. You can see it. He claims he witnessed it. This guy says that the policeman got out of the car, and the first thing he did was shoot Michael Brown in the head. That's the first thing he did. Michael Brown is standing there with his arms up, and Michael Brown and the cop shoots him in the head. Then he falls to the ground. The policeman stands over him, shoots him 4 times in the body, backs up, looks him in the eye, and shoots him 4 more times. So according to this guy, he shot once in the head and then 8 times in the body. That obviously not only is contradicted by the autopsy, but by the other 3 witnesses. Nobody else testified that he shot him in the head while he was near the car and then shot him 8 times while he was lying on the ground. So this guy is totally lying, right? And of course, he was shot in the top of the head, and if he was standing there with his arms in the air, he wouldn't have been shot in the top of the head. Being shot in the top of the head is consistent with somebody running, where their head would be pointed forward. Right? So the head wound is most consistent with somebody running towards you, not a 6'4" guy standing straight up, when the policeman is a lot shorter than 6'4". So that guy is totally lying. So throw him out. Now there's 3 guys, 3 witnesses. The other guy, right? And this is the guy who was with him. This is his friend who helped rob the liquor store or the convenience store. This guy claims that he was shot in the back, that Michael Brown was shot in the back. Now, that didn't happen. The autopsy shows that there were no shots in his back. So he's contradicted. He also has this crazy story that the policeman is trying to pull him through the window, that he just reached out and grabbed him with one arm, and he's trying to pull this 300-pound man through the window. I mean, why would anybody try to pull anyone through a window, let alone a 300-pound guy, and with one arm? You're sitting down, and you're going to have an arm sticking up, and you're going to pull a 300-pound man through the window, and apparently he couldn't get away? You're going to tell me that this 300-pound guy with 2 legs on the ground and 2 arms couldn't push himself away from this cop who was trying to pull him into the window with one of his arms? There's no way that would happen. And then he claimed that with his other arm, he pulled out his gun and fired. Why would he do that? And it doesn't even make any sense that this would happen. The only way they would be struggling at the car is if Michael Brown was trying to get in. It wouldn't be the officer trying to pull him in, because if he was trying to pull him in, this 300-pound, 6'4" guy with all the leverage, when you're standing up and the other guy is sitting down and reaching up, he has no leverage. You've got all the leverage, plus you're big. So if Michael Brown was trying to get away, that would have been easy. The only confrontation would be Michael Brown trying to get into the car and the policeman trying to keep him out. That's what makes sense. This makes no sense. And that other witness claimed, in the same interview, he claimed that he didn't know why the policeman shot Michael Brown because he was a peaceful man and he lived a peaceful life. Now, that was a lie because 10 minutes earlier, this individual was with Michael Brown when he robbed that liquor store in a very unpeaceful way. So this guy told a bunch of lies. So now you can't believe anything he says. So now half of the two witnesses are lying. Those are the guys. Now let's look at the women, right? One of the women came out and said that he was shot in the back while he was running away. And then after he was shot in the back, he turned around. Well, again, according to the autopsy, he wasn't shot in the back. There are no shots to the back. So this person is inaccurate or maybe lying. And then she says that after he turned around, the policeman just, kept firing and shot him and he fell to the ground. Now, there's one more woman who came out. And this is the only woman who theoretically, who said that he wasn't shot, in a way that was totally inconsistent with the autopsy. But she came out after the autopsy. She did not come forward as a witness until after the results of the autopsy were made public, and she knew them. Because when she is being recorded with her side of the story, she already knows the autopsy. And what she said was that Michael Brown was running away and the officer shot him in the arm. In fact, she said the bullet grazed his arm, consistent with the autopsy. That's what she said. Now, if you're a witness and you're watching somebody run away, and you're watching somebody run and you're from a distance, how do you know a bullet grazes somebody in the arm? You wouldn't know if it grazed them, missed them, hit them, or even if he grabbed his arm. You don't know if the bullet is lodged in the arm or if it grazed him. You can't see that way. She's saying it grazed him because according to the autopsy, maybe one of the bullets grazed his arm. So I think she came out after the autopsy was over to do damage control because none of the other witnesses really, all of their testimonies were refuted by the autopsy. In fact, the whole idea that his arms were in the air, according to the autopsy, several of the bullets that were shot went through his arm and penetrated his body. Now, if your arms are in the air, if you get shot in the arms, then the bullet's going to just go through the arm or keep going. It's not going to hit your body. The only way that you would get shot in the arm and it hit the body is if your arms are out in front of your body, like you're running. If you're running, your arms are out in front of your body. And if you're getting shot in the arm, well, then the bullet can pass through your arm and go into parts of your body. But if your arms are in the air, that's not going to happen. The other thing is, let's assume you're trying to kill somebody and their arms are in the air. Are you going to shoot them in the arms? Why would you do that? A guy's standing there and his arms are over his head. And now you want to execute him. You're going to aim for his arms that are over his head? Obviously, you're not going to kill him. I mean, you can empty your gun into the guy's arms and he's not going to die. I mean, maybe he eventually will bleed to death. But, if you're trying to kill somebody, you're going to aim for his chest. You're not going to aim for his arms. He's standing in the air. The arms are over the head. You tell me the officer is pointing up at this guy's arms and shooting above his head? No, the only way that you're going to shoot a guy's arms is if his arms are out in front. If they're up in the air, I mean, who would even aim for the arm? What's the odds if you're aiming for his arm and his arm is above his head? You've got this one little arm. I mean, you can easily miss it to the right or the left. No one is going to shoot a guy's arms that are over his head. So the fact that he got 4 shots to the arm shows that his arms were not in the air, but out in front of his body, right? That could be the only explanation. So all of these guys are lying. And this woman, right, the lady, when she was asked by this reporter, why did you wait so long to come forward, right? Why are you waiting until now? And I think, well, she waited because, they needed somebody to come out after the autopsy. But she said she was afraid. She was fearful. Why would she be fearful? The only reason you'd have to be fearful is if you told the truth. You see, in the community of Ferguson, and that's probably typical in a lot of these inner city communities, the cops are the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys, and nobody wants to snitch. Snitchers get stitches, or whatever the saying is. You don't snitch. And so you don't snitch on Michael Brown. So even though Michael Brown is dead, and even if you saw him attack the cop, you're not going to snitch on him. You're going to pretend that the cop executed him because that's the story. So maybe this woman actually did see the real events, and the reason she didn't want to come forward is because she was afraid of coming forward and telling the truth. But now she's not afraid to come forward and tell a lie, which is what she is doing. In fact, I think according to a reporter, the police have now more than a dozen testimonies from eyewitnesses who are speaking, I guess, off the record or privately. They're not doing it publicly because they are afraid. They're afraid that if they come out and snitch, right, and say what Michael Brown actually did, right, that he did assault a policeman, that he did charge a policeman, right, then they're afraid that some of the looters, some of the rioters are going to come find them and punish them for snitching. So those are the people who are worried. So the bottom line is all this news is now coming out, right? All the facts are coming out. Yet the mainstream media continues to ignore the facts. They continue to talk about a trial, grand jury, putting this man in jail. For what? You have no witnesses. You have 4 lying witnesses that are contradicting each other, contradicting themselves, contradicting the autopsy, and have a far-fetched story that makes no sense, that stretches, credibility to the extreme. Yet you have a plausible story from a police officer, supported by other eyewitnesses, right? Supported by the forensic evidence, supported by the autopsy. The policeman's story, Michael Brown's story, Darren Wilson's story, is the only story that makes sense. That somebody who robbed violently a convenience store would resist arrest, would make a bad decision to attack a police officer, go for his gun, then run away, and then would make another bad decision when confronting being arrested and going to jail to decide to charge an armed officer. He made a bunch of bad decisions. Darren Wilson didn't make any bad decisions as far as I'm concerned. Some people say, well, couldn't he have pulled out his mace? Not a chance. Not a chance he was going to holster his gun and try to find his mace, as if mace was going to bring down this guy when several gunshots hadn't brought him down. Look, he had any one of us in the same position would have done the same thing. And I'm sure it was a very hard decision. Nobody wants to kill anybody, right? Least alone an 18-year-old. But, sometimes you have to do it. You have to kill somebody to save your own life, and that's not murder. That's allowed. Not only could a policeman do that, anybody could do that. And if any other circumstances, right, this policeman wouldn't be charged. He would be exonerated. The police would do their own investigation. It would be no big deal. The only reason this is a national story, the only reason President Obama and the Justice Department are involved, the only reason there's all these riots is because the officer was white and the guy that he shot was black. And if that isn't racism, I don't know what is. And again, the idea that Michael Brown was surrendering, he stood there in a non-threatening position with his arms above his head. I surrender, don't shoot, I'm unarmed. Although, why would he even say he's unarmed? I mean, it's obvious he's not armed. I mean, he doesn't have a gun. The policeman is looking at him. It's not like he's, when you would say you're unarmed is if the policeman can't see you, like you're hidden behind an object and you want to let the policeman know you're not armed. But if you're standing in front of him and your arms are up in the air, there's no point in saying you're unarmed. I mean, the policeman can tell that you're not armed. I think the reason that one of the witnesses made that up is because that's the narrative, that an unarmed man was shot. And so he wants to stress the fact that he was unarmed by pretending that Michael Brown claimed that he was unarmed. But again, think about this. They're claiming that, this cop executed him. He just started shooting him even though he was standing there with his arms in the air, right? The guy's 6'4", so his arms are in the air. So his arms are at least 7 feet in the air, maybe more. Do you really think the officer who wants to shoot this guy is going to start by aiming in the air and trying to hit him in the arm and hitting him in the arm 4 times? Why would you shoot a guy 4 times in the arm that you wanted to kill? What's the point? You shoot him 4 times in the arm and then you take aim at his head. You see, if he really was executing him, right, if he really wanted to kill him and his arms are in the air, all of the bullets would hit his torso, obviously. I mean, he's not going to aim for the arms when they're up in the air. The heart, the lungs, they're not anywhere near where his arms are. The only way it makes sense to me that you would get shots in the arms is if your arms are out front, right? Your arms are in front of you, and so they come into contact with the bullets first, especially when the autopsy shows that bullets went through the arms into the body. And when are your arms in front of you? When you are running, right? He was shot in the top of the head. When are you shot in the top of the head? When you're 6'4". When your head is leaning forward, when you're leaning forward. When you run, where is your head? Out in front of you. You don't run with your head straight up in the air. You charge with your head going forwards. That's consistent. How did he fall? Forwards, right? The fact that he fell forwards on his face suggests that he had forward momentum when he was shot. That's why he fell forward. I mean, all of the forensic evidence, everything makes sense, right? That the story that these lying witnesses are telling doesn't make sense at all. Yet everybody believes it. Why? Because they want to believe it. Because it fits the narrative of the white racist cop and the innocent black child, even though none of that is true. And the question is, with all the facts coming out, what are they going to do? What are they going to do now? Now, what I would hope they would do, what I would hope President Obama would do, is to maybe appear on camera with Officer Darren Wilson, maybe put his arm around him and say, you know what, we've misjudged this man. He's a good man. And unfortunately, Michael Brown made some very bad decisions that day, and he got himself killed. And he's got to come out now. Somebody's got to put this out, because if they don't charge this man, as far as I know, they have no evidence. They have no real witnesses, credible witnesses. They don't have any evidence. They have plenty of witnesses that would support a valid shooting. You know, so if they don't charge him, right, if they don't try him, what are they going to do? How are they going to stop the riot? Because if they don't charge him, it's just going to feed the flames. This is just going to reinforce the idea that it's racist, that he's getting away with it because he's white. They're going to say, oh, well, the only reason he's not being charged is because he's white. And, you know, that's what they're going to say. So some people in the black community, maybe President Obama, now that he's interjected himself into this thing, are going to have to come out and say, you know what, the people who rushed to judgment were wrong. Right? That's what most likely is going to have to happen. Right? Because it seems like that's what the evidence is going to show. That's what the witnesses are going to show. Now, what is the odds? Is President actually going to be presidential? Because if he was going to be presidential for once in his career, that is exactly what he would do. He would urge people, not just say, hey, be calm. Just say, you know what? This was wrong. And apart from they should have condemned the riots and the looting already. But you know what? All the people who are out there, the Washington Redskins ought to come out and apologize for the demonstration, for just assuming that Darren Wilson was guilty because he was white. Now they can say, oh, well, we had some witnesses. Look, people lie all the time, you know, especially, you know, when it comes to, you know, the policemen and, you know, not wanting to rat out their fellow brothers and sisters or citizens, right? People didn't want to tattle on Michael Brown. People didn't want to snitch on Michael Brown, even though he was already dead. They want to protect him, and they want to pretend that the cops did a bad thing. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And for people not to understand that, for people just to jump to a conclusion, oh, one or two people said something, therefore it must be true. And again, just like with Trayvon Martin, as new evidence comes to light that contradicts the popular narrative, the narrative that the civil rights community or the black community wants to spin, the left-wing media wants to spin, that this is racist-based, that this is an execution of an innocent black child by a white racist cop. As more and more evidence comes out to support an alternative narrative of a justifiable shooting of a young, violent criminal. Now, I don't know, you know what Michael Brown might have done in the past. He clearly committed crimes that day. He committed several. He committed armed robbery. He committed assault. He resisted arrest. Maybe attempted murder. Who knows? He did all sorts of crimes in just a 10-minute period that we know about. Who knows what he did in the other 18 years, or not 18, but maybe 4 or 5 last years of his life as a teenager. Who knows what he did? But that is more likely to be the true story. Right? A violent teen who committed robberies, who committed crimes, assaulted a policeman, and was shot in the process of assaulting a policeman, of resisting arrest. When a policeman points a gun at you and tells you to freeze, you freeze. That's what you do. And I don't even know how you can even police Ferguson now. If police are not allowed to use their guns, even if they're assaulted by suspects, how are you going to be a policeman? How could you, especially being a white policeman in a black neighborhood? I mean, you just pretty much have to resign, right? Now, I know they're talking about now, you know, putting cameras on all the policemen so that everything they do is photographed, and probably that's a good idea, although it's going to cost a lot of money. A lot of these cities don't have a lot of extra money, but they're going to have to spend it.